So, good morning. It's so great to be here with you today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ruth. I'm the pastor for children and families, and it's such a privilege to be having a family service again. It's been about, I don't know how long, maybe 2.5 years, almost 3 years. So it's a privilege to be here with you again, and I know the kids have had a lot of fun preparing for today. But today we are starting a brand new series in the book of Daniel. And we're going to dig into the first chapter of Daniel today. But before we start this morning, we're going to do a little bit of geography and history. For those of you who know me, you know I love geography. My boys find it very hard to trip me up on geography. That is not a challenge for later, by the way. But we're going to have a look at where in the world we're looking today. So we're in a part of the world that we currently call the Middle East. It includes countries like Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Syria, and of course Israel. Now the heartland of the Assyrian Empire was the region that we now call northern Iraq, well actually most of Iraq, and northern Saudi Arabia and northeast Syria. And it's an area that has of course been in our headlines in recent years for being dominated by Islamic State, or ISIS. And ancient Babylon was located in Iraq, roughly 100 kilometres south of present-day Baghdad. So let's think about history. Our story starts roughly 300 years after King Solomon and about 600 years before Christ. Now, Assyria had been ruling that part of the world for roughly 150 years, and you can see the border there of roughly where they had their territory. Now, like ISIS, Assyria had a reputation, and it wasn't a good one. They had a reputation for harsh and uncompromising rule, brutal treatment of their enemies. They had a very strong military, culminating in the conquest of a number of small nations, including the northern kingdom of Israel, with its capital of Samaria. They had actually smashed that city, and its population had been scattered over 100 years earlier, around about 721 BC. Now, while the southern kingdom of Judah and its capital of Jerusalem had been spared back then, Assyria itself was now starting to collapse. The whole region was in turmoil. And so Egypt decided to come to their aid. And they started moving up towards Israel. But in the midst of all of this, a new power was rising on the map. Babylon, under the leadership of Nebuchadnezzar, was making moves north from the southern corner of the Mesopotamian valley. Now, at this time, the king of Judah was King Josiah, and you might remember him as the king. He was a boy king. He became a king when he was 8. But he had been king for a little while. They marched out to try to stop Egypt, but they were outnumbered and defeated. Josiah was killed, and the Egyptian pharaoh installed Jehoiakim on the throne in Jerusalem, and that is the king that is mentioned in Daniel chapter 1. However, Egypt were not strong enough against Babylon. They were defeated just 4 years later, and Babylon became the dominant power across Mesopotamia and the whole of West Asia, holding that power for the next 70 years. And if you know your Bible, you know that the exile period was 70 years. So we begin Daniel. We're at the end of one era and we're starting a new one. Now, being a smaller state, Judah had to submit to Babylon's authority, which included having some captives taken from Jerusalem to Babylon, possibly to ensure that Judah played by the Babylonians' rules. And Daniel and his friends were among this group of captives. They were most likely young teenagers at the time. And it's likely that while in Jerusalem, they were being trained for religious or government service. Their education made them really valuable to Babylon. And so they found themselves thousands of kilometres from home, torn apart from their families and everyone that they knew, removed from their culture and everything that was familiar. And they landed in a pagan enemy state, surrounded by foreign people speaking a different language and worshipping gods and idols galore. Would have been a traumatic experience. And yet it's their story in the book of Daniel that's able to give us hope. It's their story that encourages us to push on with God's mission here. So why did all of this happen? Well, let's have a look at Daniel chapter 1, verses 1 to 2. In the 3rd year that Jehoiakim was king of Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylonia attacked Jerusalem. The Lord let Nebuchadnezzar capture Jehoiakim and take away some of the things used in God's temple. And when the king returned to Babylonia, he put these things in the temple of his own God. Did you notice that? The Lord let Nebuchadnezzar capture Jehoiakim. This was God's plan. Now, while this might not totally surprise us reading this now, we've got the benefit of hindsight and also the benefit of understanding the messages of the prophets of the time. But in the time of Judah, most people had not read or heard the prophets, and those that had generally ignored them and often even sought out some other prophet that had a more palatable message, something that wasn't so judgmental or full of warning. And so the people of Judah were thrown into unexpected chaos as they tried to make sense of how God could treat his people in this way. And for those who had heard the prophets and listened to the warnings, they were left asking if there was any possible way back from this. Was this going to be the end of Israel as the chosen people of God, bringing about God's purposes? There seemed to be this great divide forming between their faith and world events, with those events seemingly contradicting their faith. And so they were left wondering whether God was still in control. There are many instances in more modern history and even current day events that cause us to come to the same question. Is God still in control? If we believe that God has commissioned us to spread the gospel far and wide, how do we reconcile that with the fact that God is allowing so many countries to close their doors and their borders to Christians, to Christian missionaries, and to Christian activities? And we think about just the last couple of years. It's in hindsight. We can see God's hand clearly at work. We can see that even though Western missions in China have been banned in many instances, it has not meant the end of God's mission in China or the end of the church there. In fact, on any given Sunday, there are more Christians worshipping in churches in China than in the entire Western Europe. And here at Syndal, we've seen that when borders were closed during lockdowns, didn't stop people in China attending Alpha Online and coming to know Jesus. Of course, we would never suggest that these opportunities for the gospel make the other terrible events good in themselves. Evil is still evil. And that's just as true of those who persecute Christians today as it was when Jerusalem was destroyed. And so this is how the book of Daniel opens, with this sort of contradiction between faith and facts. However, what becomes clear as we work through these first 6 chapters of Daniel over the coming weeks is that in each chapter we see the response of these young men who lived through exile and hardship, and yet they managed to not just survive, but to maintain the integrity of their faith, to stand out as different, to stand strong in their faith and in God. They could firmly say that God was still in control, even in a world that seemed out of control at the time. Let's see what happens to Daniel and his friends. Let's read verses 3 to 7. One day the king ordered Ashpenaz, his highest palace official, to choose some young men from the royal family of Judah and from other leading Jewish families. The king said, "They must be healthy, handsome, smart, wise, educated, and fit to serve in the royal palace. Teach them how to speak and write our language, and give them the same food and wine that I am served. Train them for 3 years, and then they can become court officials." 4 of the young Jews chosen were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, all from the tribe of Judah. But the king's chief official gave them Babylonian names. Daniel became Belteshazzar, Hananiah became Shadrach, Mishael became Meshach, and Azariah became Abednego. It's here that we meet our leading characters for the first half of the book of Daniel. These 4 were part of this initial deportation from Jerusalem to Babylon. They were from noble backgrounds, possibly even royalty. The king said they must be healthy, handsome, smart, wise, educated, fit to serve. It's clear that they were chosen to be taken to Babylon because of their education and their looks. We get the sense that this deportation was actually meant to take the cream of the crop, the best of the best, from Jerusalem for the purposes of adding to the interests and status of Babylonian society. Teach them how to speak and write our language. Give them the same food and wine. Train them for 3 years. The intention was for these men to be fully immersed into Babylonian society and culture. They were given a first-class education, a secular education, the best food and drink, so that they could then serve the Babylonian court. From the outside looking in, it could have looked like a very generous and amazing opportunity, but that was actually not the intention. Their names were changed. They were stripped of their Jewish names, given new Babylonian ones. Everything was done to ensure that they left behind their upbringing, left behind their language, their culture, their religion, and conformed to their new environment and its ways. Daniel and his friends must have wrestled with their consciences as they decided how to respond to this. And did they even have a choice? Well, yes, they did. They could have chosen complete refusal. Quite likely that would not have ended well for them. But they didn't. And that's not to say that they weren't prepared to die for their faith. We'll actually see in future weeks that in fact there are multiple occasions when they do show that level of courage and faith. But in this particular instance, they accept 3 of the requirements given to them and they refuse 1. So firstly, a Babylonian education. This was definitely a bit of a mixed bag. It would have included things like literature, mathematics, some primitive science and astrology. But on the other hand, it would have also included potentially magic, occult practices, features of religion with many gods, and astrology and all the superstition that goes with that. And yet these young Jewish men applied themselves to their studies and achieved better than any of the others around them. God made the 4 young men smart and wise. They read a lot of books. They became well educated. Daniel could also tell the meaning of dreams and visions. At the end of the 3-year period set by King Nebuchadnezzar, his chief palace official brought all the young men to him. The king interviewed them and discovered that none of the others were as outstanding as Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. and so they were given positions in the royal court. From then on, whenever the king asked for advice, he found their wisdom was 10 times better than that of any of his other advisors and magicians. And Daniel served there until the first year of King Cyrus. Daniel and his friends needed to know and understand what the Babylonians believed, but they didn't need to believe it themselves. They stuck to God through the challenge of living in a secular culture. One of the major themes in the book of Daniel is how people who worship the one true God can live and work and survive in the midst of a nation, a culture, and a government that are hostile and sometimes even life-threatening. What does it mean to live as believers in the midst of a non-Christian state and culture? How can we live in the world and yet not let the world own us and squeeze us into the shape of its own fallen values and assumptions? And so the book of Daniel was written to encourage believers to keep in mind that the future, no matter how terrifying it might seem, it rests in the hands of the sovereign God. And in that assurance, we need to get on with the challenging task of living in God's world for the sake of God's mission. So secondly, they were given a Babylonian political career. Now, this was not what these young men would have planned for as they were being educated in Jerusalem. But they used this as a way to serve God. And in chapter 3, they even told Nebuchadnezzar to his face, "The God we serve." And thirdly, their names were changed. When they were told that their names would be changed, this was more than just what people called them. In the ancient world, your identity, your family, your religion, your ethnicity, your social standing could all be tied up in the name that you were given. And for these young men, they actually all had the name of God included in their name. And so this was actually quite costly for them. Daniel means God is judge. Hananiah means Yahweh is gracious. Mishael means who is like God. And Azariah means Yahweh is my helper. Their new Babylonian names even included references to pagan gods. Now, we might think that this would have been the sticking point for them, having their names changed to remove reference to God and include pagan god references. But in making this tough choice, they were not only able to serve Babylon, but to influence it, as we'll see in future weeks. So Daniel and his friends said yes to a pagan education. They said yes to a political career. They even said yes to their names being changed. But they refused to eat the king's food. Why? Let's have a look from verse 8. Daniel made up his mind to eat and drink only what God had approved for his people to eat. And he asked the king's chief officials for permission not to eat the food and wine served in the royal palace. God had made the official friendly and kind to Daniel. But the man still told him, "The king has decided what you must eat and drink, and I'm afraid he will kill me if you eat something else and end up looking worse than the other young men." The king's official had put a guard in charge of Daniel and his 3 friends. And so Daniel said to the guard, "For the next 10 days, let us have only vegetables and water at mealtime. When the 10 days are up, compare how we look with the other young men and decide what to do with us." The guard agreed to do what Daniel had asked. Now, there are 3 possible reasons for why eating the food was not acceptable. It's possible that eating the food from the king's table would have been in opposition to their dietary requirements that they had been taught in Judah. It's also possible that the use of the food could go against their beliefs if it had been sacrificed to the pagan Babylonian gods. And it's also possible that by sharing the king's food, these Jewish young men felt that they were also accepting the king's fellowship, a pagan king at that. Remember, these were educated young men. They would have been living and eating in the Jewish way their whole lives up until this point. And to suddenly find themselves in a foreign country, to be asked to eat food that they had been taught was unclean, was quite confronting. In their minds, the requirement to eat the king's food would have stripped Daniel and his friends of their relationship with God in ways that went beyond what they could accept. But note the way they approached this with those caring for them. They asked permission. They made a compromise to test the waters, to try vegetables and water and see what happened. Now, I don't know about you, but vegetables and water doesn't sound like a very exciting diet, does it? But if you follow the logic of our senior pastor, and I've heard this from his mouth, vegetables are plants, including beans. Cocoa beans are plants. Cocoa beans are used to make chocolate, therefore chocolate is a vegetable. But no, they weren't eating chocolate. Ancient Babylonian vegetables would have been things like peas, cabbage, turnips, leeks, beets, chickpeas, garlic. Yes, some beans, but not cocoa beans. Shallots, cucumbers, things like that. So it was a not overly exciting diet. But this attitude of Daniel and his friends gives us such a really good example of how we should approach things when we take a stand on something. Being polite and offering constructive suggestions is worth the effort. Daniel and his friends stood out from the crowd, sticking to their faith. But standing out doesn't always mean having to be the loudest, most visible person in the room. Daniel, in many ways, was a quiet achiever. And what was the end result of this effort and this diet of vegetables? 10 days later, Daniel and his friends looked healthier and better than the young men who had been served food from the royal palace. And after this, the guard let them eat vegetables instead of the rich food and wine. It took significant strength of character and faith to make this decision and to follow through. Now, in our drama earlier, we saw that the popular choice was not always the correct one. In fact, our contestant Olivia was able to hear past all the noise of our audience and even the advice of her fellow contestants and stick with what she knew to be true and correct. And we too should follow this example. We have the ultimate guidebook, the Bible. That should always be our first point of reference before listening to the world around us. Now, we've missed a very important subject this morning. We've done music, we've done drama. Feels like we've sort of done assembly, doesn't it? We've done geography and history, social studies, literature. It's time for science. See? Yes, okay. We love doing science in Tribe. We do it almost every week. Do a little bit of physics, do a little bit of chemistry. So it's only right that we do some upstairs today, right? Yes, okay. So as we're talking about Daniel and his faith, we're going to do a little experiment. I've got some water in a cup. And when we think about water, we might think of it being slippery, wet and slippery. And sometimes we can possibly even describe people or someone's faith as slippery. And a slippery person is someone who is easily influenced and swayed. So let's see how slippery our water is today. Just move this back so everyone can see. So I've got this cup of water. I did put some food dye in it because, again, Tribe, we always use food dye. And I didn't really get any on my hands. But it's just plain water apart from the food dye, nothing special, straight out of the tap. And I've got a piece of cardboard. And I'm going to put the cardboard over the top of the cup. And I'm going to tip the cup upside down. Do you have a bowl for safety? and we'll see if any of this water is slippery and comes out. Okay? Tiny little dribble. All right. Now I'm going to take my hand on the cardboard away. Oops. Whoop. Might need to start again. My hand slipped. Now, you were all expecting water to go everywhere, weren't you? Yeah. I was really hoping it wasn't. Okay, so the water was still in the cup, even though it was upside down. And we would expect that slippery water to come out and go everywhere. We would expect the gravity to pull that cardboard down and the slippery water out. But in actual fact, water is not slippery, it's sticky. And so it sticks together in the cup. And the force of the air pushing the cardboard up was actually stronger than the force of the weight of the water coming down. Now, that's what I want you to remember today. Water is sticky, and just like water is sticky, Daniel's faith was sticky too. He wasn't slippery, he wasn't easily influenced or swayed into thinking or doing something other than what he knew to be true as a person of faith in God. Daniel stuck to God. He stuck to the truth. He stuck to the things that he knew God wanted him to do. He didn't slip over to what the Babylonians believed or the way that they behaved. Daniel knew that God was still in control. Daniel stood out from the crowd because of his stickiness. The challenge for us is to be more like Daniel, to have sticky faith, to know and to understand that the Word of God in the Bible is true and to hold firm to that as we live in this world. Now, I do run the risk of annoying a few people by getting this song stuck in your head, so apologies in advance. But there is a classic, one of the very early VeggieTales videos that looks at the looks at the story of Daniel from chapter 3. So it's the fiery furnace, and whoever's on week 3, I'm not stealing your thunder. But the final song on that video is actually relevant to the whole of Daniel's story. And the chorus goes like this. I'm not going to sing it. So stand up for what you believe in. Believe in God. He'll stand with you. That is the summary of Daniel chapter 1. Have sticky faith, stand with God, and he'll stand with you. Now, we're not going to sing this song to close. We are going to sing a different song to close. And the song we're going to close with today talks about our relationship with God as his children, chosen, free, and with a place reserved in his house. The same type of relationship that Daniel had with God and never wavered from. So I'm going to invite our team to come up now, and we're going to stand and worship together.